I heard a leader, no names mentioned, who said, space is our next battleground. Uh-oh, we're in big trouble because we can battle on this planet all we want, and nobody's gonna care a whole lot out there. But as soon as you cross that line, you know, like you're a little kid and somebody says, don't cross that line. Well, now we're big kids, and somebody's gonna try and cross that line. And as a civilization, as a society, a worldwide society, we have to stop that.
Fly over, fly over. Sing! Fly over, fly over. Chant! Fly over, fly over.
Stop on the gas, kick down the accelerator.
Sing! Fly over, fly over.
Don't wanna get back up, don't wanna get captured.
Chant! Fly over, fly over.
Stop on the gas, kick down the accelerator.
Sing! Fly over, fly over. Mr. Trans-Metropolitan, get out of my way. There ain't enough hours in my day. The city's on fire in the pouring rain. Steam is rising faster than a runaway train.
With the man and the shit, she find computers and MCs. The bloody turf, for MC for the Gucci. I'm gonna be behind the wheel away, never going home. Skinniness, standiness at the transit zone.
Fly over, fly over.
Stop on the gas, take down the accelerator.
Fly over,
fly over. Don't wanna get back up, don't wanna get captured. Fly over, fly over. Step on the gas, take down the accelerator. Fly over, fly over. Don't wanna get back up, don't wanna get captured. Speeding through the invisible 20%. Watch a race between the guilty and the innocent. Rubbing shoulders with the super class engines. Burning up the Urals in South Kensington. Choking up a lot of fire, smoking on the air. Sunday should rather be anywhere but here. Choking up a lot of fire, smoking on the air. Sunday should rather be anywhere but here. Sing! Fly over, fly over. Step on the gas, get down the accelerator. Fly over, fly over. Don't wanna get mad, I don't wanna get captured. Fly over.
Not slow down. The drive to destruction is the heaviest sound. The city is blind, but it will not slow down. The drive to destruction is the heaviest sound. Is the heaviest sound. Is the heaviest sound.
positive energy. That's the bass line for the bump, for the creativity. I said you know this is a place to be. You know it's always been a place to be. You know it's always been a place to be. I said you know this is a place to be. I tell them London City. Fly over, step on the gas, kick down the accelerator. Fly over, nobody get back, no one that can capture. Don't wanna be down in the station and the stroke on midnight. You only wanna go where there's plenty of light. Asking for direction, man, I'm tired of my way. You know there's never time, you know there's never enough hours in a day. You know there's never enough hours in a day, in a day, in a day.
The city is blind, but it will not slow down. The drive to destruction is the heaviest sound.
Oh.
A shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself.
Major General Rudy Schwarzkopf. I'm the official spokesman for the United States Industrial Military Complex, for the United States Military Forces. Now, I've been asked to talk to you good faithful by our people who run your country, by your officially elected federal representatives there in the federal government, to explain to you good Austrians why most of the contrails from the aircraft above your heads are now pumping out 50-mile-long vapor trails that blot out the sun after a few hours, instead of dissipating after 30 seconds like they used to do before 1999. Now, let me assure you, good Austrians, we know and love you well, so we would never conduct covert aerial operations or experiments on you without telling somebody in your government. We have told the same people in your government that we instructed about weapons of mass destruction, Mandy Habib, and the CIA attacks on 9/11. The Al-Qaeda attacks on 9/11. What we are doing, which is nothing. Now, this concern for the loss of the blue sky above your heads and the increase in lung disease and the toxic accumulation of heavy metals and biological and radioactive compounds in your blood supply cannot be pinned on us in the United States Air Force. As we make sure that we fly early in the morning and late at night at 40,000 feet above your heads. That's what we would do if we was doing it, which we ain't doing. These so-called chemtrails that some left-wing pinkos are calling them, and some right-wing conservatives, as well as some research scientists that can no longer get federal funding for their research, and some concerned citizens as well. Anyway, these chemtrails are just ordinary exhaust fumes from a few high-altitude jets that have got their mix wrong in their carburetors, which then makes the mufflers burn a bit dirty, and we'll be working on those troublesome engines soon. It should only take about 5 years, which by that time there'll be less people anyway to complain about this fictitious situation, which is being called the Darwin theory operation, which just means good old survival of the fittest. That is, of course, unless you have built an underground bunker fitted with a HEPA filter, like the bunkers we built for our top military and political men and women. Then, of course, you don't have to be fit or smart, just well connected. Whatever you do, just stay calm, or the increased adrenaline in your blood supply will affect our research results. Make you upset. Have a bad effect on your health. Let me assure you, you will not see any stories in the mainstream media to back up these claims that we are spreading submicron sized particles of aluminium oxide, barium, and a variety of biological compounds in your air supply. So it can't be happening, because if it ain't on your mainstream media, it don't exist. Because you can absolutely trust the commercial networks to tell you everything that's going on, despite the fact that most of them are owned by the major weapons corporations. And your public broadcasters like the ABC are never afraid to tell it like it is, because their funding is not affected by our people who run your country. Your official federal representatives. So, good Austrians, sleep well tonight, knowing that we have a constant military presence over your house. Your Air Force has a constant military presence over your house. But don't leave the windows open, and you might want to stay indoors on a hot, dry day, or a wet, windy one, or a wet, cold one. Stay indoors, especially when it rains. In fact, don't go outside. Don't do nothing. Stay indoors and breathe shallow. This has been Major General Rudy Schwarzkopf signing off on behalf of the United States Military Industrial Complex. On behalf of the United States Military Forces. Bye now. Goddamn, I hate doing this stuff. Oh, well, won't need to in death for 5 years. There won't be no one around over there in good old Austria. Huh? Still on. Oh, hi! Bye now. You can cut that out, can't you?
the early part of 1999, a website under the name of www.carnicum.com was created to call attention to the unusual events and effects surrounding aircraft activity over the southwestern desert skies of the United States. The developer of that site was a generally quiet and conservative former federal employee with no political or environmental notoriety. Within a matter of days, it was apparent that this site was immediately drawing attention from a broad host of high-level government and military agencies, defense contractors, research organizations, chemical and pharmaceutical companies, and health organizations. This interest was documented on this same site for a period of several months, by which time an obvious pattern of monitoring the developing research was apparent. Over the next few years, a glaring disparity had evolved. On one hand, a high level of monitoring of documentation, sampling methods, research, analysis, and disclosure efforts was now documented. On the other, a campaign of continuous dismissal of the significance of the issue and a refusal to investigate was conducted by those very same visitors. You are now seeing a small sample of these frequent visitors and monitoring agencies and companies, such as the Pentagon, multiple Air Force bases, the United States Senate, aircraft manufacturers, pharmaceutical and drug companies, national security, intelligence and emergency agencies, weapon and defense system contractors, research organizations, and the media. What you are seeing now is quite normal. These contrails are the trademark of high-altitude aircraft since the close of World War II. You notice that the condensation disappears fairly quickly, much like your breath on a cold winter day. This is as it should be, and as it has been. For those curious enough to delve into the physics, chemistry, and thermodynamics of contrails, this normalcy has a more thorough explanation. Yes, science and common sense do agree, and the balances of nature are achieved with this common phenomenon. And now we must take a different turn, a turn to explore an unusual world that now surrounds us, and yet a world that many of us remain unaware of. The atmosphere of this planet has been changed, and you are now being introduced to one of the main causes of that change. The aircraft at the upper portion of the screen is leaving a normal contrail, and it vanishes as any trail of water vapor is expected to. But beneath it you see an aircraft emission that is stationary, thick, continuous, and persistent, and it must eventually be concluded that it is not primarily water vapor. The environmental conditions for each trail are not exceptionally different from one another, and yet the result and impact from each trail is entirely different. The only logical way this can occur is if the trails themselves are very different from one another, and indeed they are. The majority of the footage that you are now seeing has been filmed in the high desert regions of New Mexico. This is an arid environment with very low humidity levels. It is, in fact, a classic region for conventional contrail formation. Contrails themselves can and do form easily in a low humidity environment, and in the past, the passing of a short-lived contrail in the high, clear desert sky was an innocuous and frequent occurrence. Cold and dry conditions, exactly those conditions that are normally found in the upper atmosphere, are extremely favorable to contrail formation. The humidity levels of the upper atmosphere are actually relatively low, and is one of the very reasons that most clouds occur in the middle of the troposphere, being the lower portion of our atmosphere up to an altitude of approximately 7 miles or so. As this examination of our atmosphere continues, we will be now required to consider 4 types of events or phenomena. In addition to the customary existence of clouds and contrails, we must now consider a new entry, that of the aerosol. An aerosol is a solid particle in suspension, either in a liquid or a gas, and in this case we are considering the atmosphere as the gas to study. The aerosols will manifest in 2 primary forms, as an aerosol emission from aircraft and as an aggregate or collection of aerosols in the atmosphere. A suitable term for this collection of aerosols is an aerosol bank. It is known now that the persistent trails that form the subject of this film are primarily solid in nature and origin, and that they are not predominantly water vapor. A brief explanation of cloud formation will help us to understand why this is so. Clouds, that is, normal clouds, require 2 fundamental elements to form, particles and moisture. Clouds are not suited to form in especially clean air. They require particulate matter, called condensation nuclei, that act as a base for water vapor to adhere to. The size of these nuclei, for the process to be effective, must be extremely small. The size of these nuclei are on the order of sub-micron. For comparison, a human hair is 60 to 100 microns thick, and an asbestos fiber is a couple of microns in thickness. The other essential component for normal clouds to form is a minimum level of humidity. From numerous sources, this minimum is on the order of 70% relative humidity. Notice that the requirements for cloud formation and contrail formation are already entirely different from one another. This is because they are entirely different phenomena based upon entirely different physical principles. Contrails can and should form readily in clean, cold, and dry air. Normal clouds, on the other hand, require higher moisture levels and a particulate or aerosol base from which to develop. radical transformation of our sky as a direct result of aircraft activity now forces us to address an entirely new set of conditions. Aircraft are now repeatedly dispersing materials into the upper atmosphere at flight altitude, roughly from 35,000 to 40,000 feet. These materials expand rather than evaporate, and they usually transform into an unsightful haze that over the recent years has decreased our general visibility down to ground levels. One of the remarkable facts is that this commonly now occurs at very low levels of relative humidity, on the order of 30 to 40%, instead of the 70% or greater that is associated with cloud formation. And so we know now that these are not clouds in any conventional sense. They are indeed a unique and artificial creation that now crosses new thresholds in the atmospheric and geophysical sciences. There is one way that such a transformation can be made, and that is with the introduction of vast quantities of an extremely small, water-loving metallic salt at flight altitude. This transformation cannot be achieved with water vapor alone, and the emissions under examination are indeed not water vapor. They are solid, and they are well entrenched into your air supply. These important conclusions are at the very heart of the aerosol operations that are being disclosed here. These fundamental changes in the very atmosphere that we breathe have a fundamental impact upon the life of this planet, and these aerosol operations have many potential applications that reduce the sanctity of that life. These operations are being conducted. They are being conducted without your participation or your informed consent. They are affecting your life, the lives of those you know and love, and the very life of the planet itself. Tests were conducted in an extremely arid environment in the high southwest of the United States. This arid environment has been further aggravated by extended drought conditions over the past several years, also a topic to be discussed further. It is a fact that particulate matter in the atmosphere acts as a transport mechanism or delivery system for other materials, including biological materials that can piggyback onto the solid materials. This is in addition to the health risk, including respiratory illness and increased mortality that result from higher levels of particulate matter in the air. It is also a fact that must be reported, despite the disturbing and alarming implications, that unusual and unexpected biological components have been repeatedly identified in a variety of atmospheric samples across a wide geographic area using a variety of techniques. These include the HEPA electrostatic precipitation and ground sample methods referred to earlier. The fibrous material sent to the United States EPA is especially unsettling, as it was later shown to contain biological components under the review of a medical professional. The best analysis made under those circumstances, as well as with later independent studies, strongly suggests the existence of freeze-dried erythrocytes within that sample. For those who might think that biological aerosols have no precedent, it might be worthwhile to read carefully the documented U.S. Senate hearings held in 1997, entitled Examination of Serious Deficiencies in the Defense Department's Effort to Protect the Human Subjects of Drug Research, along with the contractors that are enumerated within that report. A variety of electromagnetic devices have been developed and used, including a sensitive Gauss meter, frequency generators, and resonant circuits. An extremely low-frequency, ELF, and very low-frequency receiver, VLF, has been designed and constructed, along with a suitable antenna. A magnetometer has also been developed to study variations in the Earth's magnetic field. This investigation has resulted from the plausible hypothesis that the atmosphere has now been modified into what is called a plasma state, or an electrified gas. Testing has produced a variety of indications that this hypothesis is indeed correct, and that the atmosphere is regularly being used for electromagnetic applications. ELF energy is of special concern because of its direct connection to the health aspects of the electromagnetic nature of human beings. Artificial pulse energy appears to now have been detected on a variety of occasions, and evidence indicates that it is now a part of our unseen environment. Electrolysis methods have further confirmed the existence of unexpected ionizing metallic salts within our atmosphere. Radar anomalies also continue to point to the presence of an altered electromagnetic environment. The testing and sampling methods and results that you have just witnessed are necessary due to the abject failure of the public environmental authorities to respond appropriately to the many claims for investigation that have been made by countless citizens. The responses of the so-called officials and authorities will soon become questioned. So even the Native American community did not show the level of independence or the level of assertiveness to make this an issue? Response: it was heartbreaking to me, but they're a little more philosophical too. One of the medicine people that's a friend said to me, "You know, this has been prophesized. We call it the death winds. We always thought that it would be nuclear fallout, but maybe this is the death winds." They have a very skeptical view anyway of what the white man's intentions are. Comment: and with good cause. Response: and with good cause, and with history behind it. So, and they've also lost every battle, basically, they have fought that way. But I think as more and more of them get sick, and they are, there is maybe a wider awakening that this is really, really serious. Question: you have a background in the world of journalism, and specifically broadcast journalism. Can you talk a little bit about that background, and also the relationship of the media to what is occurring, what has failed, what has worked, any efforts that you have made to motivate the media to involve themselves in this, to cover this issue? Response: yes, well, you and I are friends now, so you know that I was in broadcasting for 30 years. I worked for all three affiliated networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, in many of the larger markets, and I culminated my career as an anchor at CNN and Headline News. So the medicine part of me was kind of going along as my passion, and so I made my living and had my career as a broadcaster, and any free time I had was spent studying the medicine, because that was where my true heart lay. So I have over the years a lot of really good contacts in some pretty high places in the media, but I would imagine pretty much everybody watching this will know there has been dramatic changes in the media. Who owns the media? The quality of human now being attracted into the media. In other words, why are they there? When I started, it was mostly all print folk, and they kind of had to tell us, come on, clean up your act. This is visual. But people were coming from the old school of journalistic, afflict the comfortable, and comfort the afflicted, and you are the watchdog, and you go for that story, and you never accept the official version, and on and on and on. Most of the media and information we get now is owned by only 3 companies. When they deregulated, the FCC deregulated, they allowed these huge, like AOL, Time Warner, to gobble up. So you've got these large entities controlling all the information, whether it's film, radio. Okay. So the complexion has changed, and I would say the kind of person drawn into it, when it became a place where you could make a really good living, and people would go, "Oh, I know you, you're so-and-so." It drew people with different agendas. So you don't necessarily have the hardcore, old-fashioned, get the story. I don't care if my hair is a mess. I don't care if I'm dripping wet. There's a few out there still, but for the most part. So that's that. And yes, when this started, I called in every chip I ever had. I called a very good buddy at CNN, who really assigned most of the stories. He was very high, very interested. I sent him your website, a lot of your information. He was high, yay, shut down, and I never did get an explanation. As you well know, I contacted some of our local media people. The main anchor on the local station wanted to do a story, we thought, and we shot a lot of video of the activity. In those days, it was very obvious. Now it's a little harder. You don't have the mornings where you have the deep blue sky, and then the afternoon. You get the pale blue-white sky if you're lucky. And as you well know, that story never aired. Comment. I would consider that a fairly serious dedicated effort by a media person, and yet we saw nothing come of it. Response. Nothing came of it. Exactly. As you well know, the USA Today, which is an international publication, did a story on it, but it was obviously with an agenda, basically poking fun at those goofy people who saw those things. I believe there was 1 or 2 credible people interviewed, but for the most part, the reporter started out with an agenda to sort of mock, make fun of those people who were seeing things in the sky. And if I had a dime for everybody else that they called, wrote, or begged, I could at least buy an ice cream cone. To no avail, just hitting a wall. Comment. And this was with all your connections. Response. This is with years of connections. It's unprecedented in my life. And I cannot name another story. People point to Watergate as this big watershed cover-up. I find that laughable. This, in my opinion, is the biggest story, and I approached many of my colleagues this way. This is the biggest story in recorded human history. You have an entire planet now covered with whatever by whoever, and nobody's even acknowledging it. What the heck is going on, and how come we don't know? Question. That's the question. What could explain that level of refusal? Response. A few things, okay? A few things, to be fair. Fear. I saw that. Fear. Because the folks that get it know who's doing it, and they're afraid. Okay? They know it's something bigger than them. They know all the possibilities of who is able to put planes in the sky. That many, every day, 24/7. It doesn't take a nuclear physicist to figure out that it's not the guy around the corner. This is big. Comment. So even the journalist has that threshold that they're unwilling to cross. Response. Oh yeah. Afraid. And the few that are left who do catch on to it and say, wow, I want to do this story, like we were just discussing. They hit a wall somewhere, and I'm never told where it is. I don't know if it's the news director. I don't know if it's the station manager. I don't know who. But they hit that brick wall, and it goes away. after confronting the reality of the changes that have been made to the planet, it is a natural question to ask, why? Why would anyone want to? And who would want to alter the very air that we all breathe? We may never know the true answers to these questions, as the evidence is now clear that the aerosol operations are a covert operation, an operation that is never to be openly discussed or disclosed using the traditional channels of a free and democratic society, an operation that will never ask for your consent or for your participation, and that will be conducted regardless of your concern. The answers, especially as to why, do not appear to be simple or restricted to a single purpose. The more that is understood about the nature and potential of the operations, the more complex the picture appears. What can be done, however, is to use the vast body of evidence that has been collected at a grassroots level to make interpretations that are at least consistent with this data. This has been done, and there are now 5 major areas of endeavor that are in agreement with the observations, data, and analysis that extends for more than 5 years. These are: number 1, environmental engineering, modification, and control; 2, electromagnetic operations; 3, military operations; 4, biological operations; and 5, planetary and geophysical change itself. These areas are not mutually exclusive to one another. There is an overlap that can make it difficult to discern where one program may start and another end. It is quite possible that any, and indeed likely that many or all of these operations are being conducted concurrently. What can be done within this brief segment is to explain how and why these types of programs are consistent with the broad spectrum of evidence that is now available to examine. First, with respect to environmental engineering, modification, and control. The evidence now shows that the very physical nature of the atmosphere has been changed. The best information leads to the conclusion that a hygroscopic, or water-seeking salt, is a dominant component of the aerosols that have been introduced. It is also an observation that has been confirmed over and over, and this is that the operations frequently, if not usually, are conducted in advance of approaching moisture and storms. These salts have the usual effect of locking up that moisture with the solid particles, and to generally reduce the impact of, frequency of, and the amount of moisture that reaches the ground. This is one of the simplest interpretations that can be made that is supported by countless observations, and this is that the moisture levels of weather systems have been altered. It may be no coincidence whatsoever that drought is now commonplace and widespread, and that the moisture of the planet is becoming an increasingly precious and sought-after resource. There are those who make claims that the aerosol operations have an intended, benevolent objective to mitigate the effects of global warming. It is also apparently accepted within that same claim that it is best that such an intention not be internationally discussed in public, and that you are best off not knowing about it. Unfortunately, the data does not support the contentions of benevolence that have been made, and in fact the majority of the data can be considered to have detrimental and potentially disastrous consequences to the life and ecology of this planet, including humans. Furthermore, the vast majority of elements and substances under examination will actually increase the heat levels of the lower atmosphere rather than decrease it when they are placed into it. This is exactly what the observations themselves support, and that is that drought conditions are exacerbated and aggravated by the introduction of the aerosols, and not mitigated, as many might choose to believe. In addition, there are many more complicated aspects of environmental control that are possible with the use of conductive aerosols, including the modification of the electrical nature of the atmosphere, as well as thermal instabilities induced by interactions with the magnetic field of the Earth. Storms depend upon the electrical exchanges that take place within the atmosphere. Lightning is the result of electrical imbalances that occur in the electrical fields between the Earth and the atmosphere, altering the collection and distribution of rainfall, interfering with the electrical exchange of energy and producing thermal or heat instabilities, All of these point to a very realistic assessment that environmental modification and control is likely a fundamental agenda within the aerosol operations. The United States Air Force has publicly disclosed a doctrine of owning the weather by 2025, and many have good reason to believe that such objectives have in part already been accomplished. This brief introduction to this topic only considers impacts upon the atmospheric shell, literally an eggshell of life that surrounds this planet. Understanding the full environmental impact, including the soil, the seas and lakes, the flora and fauna, the agriculture that sustains us, can only lead to an ominous portent of environmental change that we must pay the price for with our apathy. Not only are the moisture and heat characteristics of the atmosphere altered with the introduction of aerosols, but the electromagnetic properties have likely been changed as well. An ion is a charged electrical particle, and all of the data supports the claim that massive amounts of easily ionized particles are another important part of the grand geophysical picture. There are some elements that can actually become charged with the energy from ultraviolet light and even visible light in some cases. Barium is one such element that falls into this category. The implications of being able to modify the atmosphere electrically and magnetically are enormous, and a variety of physical methods that are used to transfer, manipulate, control, and propagate energy in that medium must then be considered. As an example of how a small change can produce a major effect, consider the following statement from Lancaster University in the United Kingdom on the topic of the ionosphere. Quote, although less than 1% of the upper atmosphere becomes ionized, the charged particles make the gas electrically conducting, which completely changes its characteristics. The ionosphere can carry electrical currents as well as reflect, deflect, and scatter radio waves. Unquote. What we see, therefore, is that a small change in the electrical properties of the atmosphere, be it the upper or now lower atmosphere, completely alters the way in which that shell around the Earth can be used. This concept introduces us to the topic of plasma physics, which may be more in the grasp of common understanding than might first be believed. Most of us are familiar with a neon or fluorescent light tube. This is a perfectly common example of what plasma physics is about. In that tube, there is an ionized gas, and energy can easily be sent through that tube to produce the effect of light in that case. A plasma is an electrically conductive gas. This means that there is a source of ions and electrons within that gas, and that these electrons can be used to carry current. We have seen that it takes very little change to produce a large change in the electrical properties of that gas, and the effectiveness of energy transfer and accumulation is governed primarily by the number of electrons that can be introduced into it. The term that describes this is electron density, and it becomes increasingly important in our understanding of the likely goals of the aerosol operations. Multiple measurements of atmospheric conductivity levels, extremely low frequency and very low frequency radiation, as well as magnetic variation, support the claims made that the basic electrical properties of our atmosphere have been changed. These two physical properties alone that have been mentioned, that of thermodynamic and electrodynamic change, have the prospect of changing our world so much that even the most conservative of environmentally aware individuals should be aware of the prospect for disturbance and damage. Changes in heat and energy are at the foundation of the life of this planet and all those who dwell upon it. It is a necessary, logical, and natural extension to our discussion of applications to include the almost inevitable role the military assumes within them. Indeed, the dichotomy of extreme, sustained, and continuous interest and monitoring of the aerosol research by the military and intelligence complex, juxtaposed with the public declaration by the U.S. Air Force that this entire subject is a hoax, is curious enough that many of us may wish to seek the truth of the matter. The most advanced military agencies, intelligence services, and defense contractors clearly have an interest in monitoring and controlling the level of discussion and disclosure on the aerosol issue. The tools of research and analysis must therefore be used at least in part to compensate for the lack of openness that now shrouds this democracy under the guise of national security. A glimpse into the military window has been achieved, and a central theme will eventually emerge, and that is of control. Control in the deepest and far-reaching sense that you may imagine. For when the atmosphere of the planet is controlled, life itself, in the end, is controlled. With a basic knowledge of plasma physics, that is, the physics of an energized gas or atmosphere, it is impossible to proceed further without at least a brief introduction to the HAARP facility and technology. HAARP, or High Active Auroral Research Program, is operated by the U.S. Air Force and is claimed to be simply a research facility. The stated purpose by the Air Force for the HAARP project is that of a scientific endeavor aimed at studying the properties and behavior of the ionosphere, with particular emphasis on being able to understand and use it to enhance communications and surveillance systems for both civilian and defense purposes. It may be this, and then again, it may be more than simply a scientific endeavor. It may also be enlightening to consider United States Patent 4686605 by Bernard Eastlund in 1987 entitled, A Method and Apparatus for Altering a Region in the Earth's Atmosphere, Ionosphere, and or Magnetosphere. There are many who have sensibly concluded that this patent essentially represents a blueprint for the HAARP facility as it has been constructed. This patent makes mention of numerous objectives and methods of operation that far exceed any scientific endeavor alone, and references the work of Nikola Tesla as a source of historical contribution. The amazing inventions and achievements of Tesla with respect to energy transfer and amplification, including the use of the atmosphere as a medium for sending energy from point A to point B, are well documented. The documents of Tesla were eventually confiscated at the close of his life, especially as they related to military matters, and he is generally now accepted as an unrecognized genius. The current incarnation of ionospheric heating is able to, according to Mr. Eastlund, put unprecedented amounts of power in the Earth's atmosphere at strategic locations, and to maintain that power level with the pulsing of energy. This patent also recommends the use of large clouds of barium so that ionization by sunlight will increase the electron density within the plasma environment. Testing and analysis does now positively indicate the presence of unusual levels of barium, a toxic element, within atmospheric samples. The amount of power inherent in the design of the HAARP project is further indicated by Mr. Eastlund stating that the present invention can be formed to simulate or perform the same functions as a detonation of a heave-type nuclear device without actually having to detonate such a device. A heave weapon has the effect of lifting the magnetic field of the Earth itself and involves the expenditure of massive amounts of energy. The patent is further stated to have numerous military implications, including the enhancement of or interference with communication and guidance systems, including those of airplanes and missiles, radar interference, missile destruction, weather modification, material transport of micron-sized particles, and molecular change of the atmosphere are each mentioned as further applications of the patent design. The executive summary for the HAARP project also specifically mentions forcing the descent of particles from the atmosphere toward the ground using ELF radiation from HAARP. Clearly, environmental modifications, the electromagnetic transfer of energy, and military operations of global impact are already in sight from the existence of these aerosols within our atmosphere.
mid-90s, I came up with a technique that I took to the Air Force. And now I regret that terribly. It's the same reason why I will not take any technology to these people that would be used to get through the Van Allen belts, because these people use it for devious mechanisms to harm the public. What I did in the mid-90s, I took this to the Air Force and NOAA, and I said, I will give you this for free. It's a technology which will allow us to manipulate storms and drag them away from shorelines that would affect people, and we can diminish the energy in storms using these techniques. Well, what they've done is taken those same techniques, built large laser satellites that are in orbit around the Earth, and these are what are dragging the storms around and pumping up the energy in these storms. What they basically do is they shine a laser, and these can be in many different frequencies, and this is what I measured directly last January when I went out into the Pacific, because I knew they were doing this. I knew they were playing with these storms out in the Pacific off the west coast of the United States, and I got up to an altitude of about 40-some thousand feet, about 45,000 feet, and was able to view and capture the satellite manipulation of a storm system as they took it from Oregon and dragged it down towards California. So this was the first direct measurement confirmation that they were manipulating these storms with satellites and the laser beams coming down from satellites.
In 1977, the United States Senate held hearings on the subject of biological testing by the Department of Defense on human subjects without their informed consent. In the opening statement, Senator Kennedy identifies the key issue of the hearings, the known use of Americans as unwitting human subjects for open-air germ warfare testing conducted in the public domain by officials of our own government. Furthermore, he poses the critical question: should a democratic people cede to its government the full responsibility of determining when secret tests on unwitting subjects are necessary to protect the nation's security? It appears that this key issue was never truly addressed, and that, almost 30 years later, this responsibility is no longer a question that is even being posed to the public. It is a fact, however unpleasant and distressing the consideration may be, that biological components have been repeatedly identified in a series of tests of atmospheric samples over a period of several years. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has refused to identify physical material that has been demonstrated to contain biologicals of this same form. These components appear to involve the use of desiccation, freeze-drying, and aerosol distribution methods, exactly the same methods itemized within the private contractor listings of the Senate hearings. Evidence further indicates that extremely advanced biotechnical methods are likely to be a part of the development and delivery process. To date, no professional or public medical professionals have attempted to duplicate the test methods and results, and the evidence continues to be provided only through independent citizen activism. Acknowledgement and response to this evidence by all public officials remains lacking. There is currently no prospect of government hearings on the aerosol issue, and the reality of the evidence continues to be denied by public officials. And lastly, although more conceptual in nature than our earlier discussion on environmental modification, electromagnetic, military, and biological aspects of the aerosol issue, it is not unreasonable to consider interactions with the Earth as a whole. It is not impossible that there may be connections between the energy levels of this altered plasma of the Earth and geophysical processes, including Earth changes. There has been increased attention in recent months by prestigious scientific organizations, mainstream media, and the Defense Department itself on dramatic Earth changes that are foreseen in a not-too-distant future. These discussions center on major climatic change and geophysical field changes, such as the magnetic field. Under disclosure is the likelihood that these changes occur much more rapidly than was previously supposed. It is at least a theoretical reality that a plasma sheath around the Earth can accumulate energy. This originates from the combination of increased electron density and low-frequency energy propagation. There are many questions that can be asked as to how and if this energy can be harnessed to affect the Earth. The many abnormal Earth changes already on the record during the recent years certainly offer a motive for examining the energy transfer between the Earth and the now altered atmosphere. You have seen traces of a world still in a state of beauty, and you have seen the signs of a terrible change. It will be for you to decide if the claims of this documentary are true or not. You have seen the distinctions between what mankind has known for decades to be in harmony with our surroundings, and that which is a product of our urge for technological supremacy over nature. You have seen a clear sky, this blue that was but is no more. The sky that has been taken away from us all. You have been confronted with assertions of operations on a scale never seen before in the history of mankind, and you have been shown evidence that aircraft can alter and have altered the fragile envelope for life that we call the atmosphere. You have seen science and sampling applied to the problem over and over at the grassroots level. Numerous methods have been demonstrated that show artificial and deliberate modification of the atmosphere, including its chemical, thermal, electromagnetic, and physical properties. There are detrimental effects that can be anticipated and that have been observed as a result of these changes in our air, and we must all accept the consequences of the toxic environment that has been created. The health of our home and lives have been sacrificed in the search for dominion and control. You have witnessed a high level of interest in the subject of this documentary by the military branches at the highest level, the intelligence services, the chemical industry, research organizations, defense contractors, bioengineering firms, and the pharmaceutical complex. You have heard the responses of the public, government, and even environmental organizations in response to the innumerable requests by the public for investigation. These responses repeatedly revert to describing phenomena that are normal and commonly observed, while denying and dismissing the extraordinary observations that sensible and reasonable citizens have called attention to. There has been a sustained campaign to ridicule and discredit the cumulative efforts of years of research, activism, and devotion by countless individuals acting from the motive of concern for the health of this planet and its inhabitants. A free and democratic society, if it is to continue to exist, must be able to openly discuss the benefits of technological and military supremacy against the deleterious impact upon the environment that we as global citizens must share. Divine rights of humankind must assume their rightful place amongst the individual nation's right for military security and secrecy. You have heard the responses of only a few citizens and professionals who state their sensible concerns about the impact of the aerosol operations upon our environment and our health. The lack of time prevents the presentation of the awareness that is now known to be shared by a grassroots network that conservatively must include millions of people. The extent of this awareness across national boundaries is apparent, and this network is of global proportion. The control of media information by relatively few corporate interests appears to be a significant factor in the restriction of honest and open public discourse on the aerosol issue. The attempts at ridicule of this issue by the U.S. military establishment should also be evaluated as to intent and motive. You have been provided with an analysis of the potential agendas of the aerosol operations. The conduct of environmental, military, electromagnetic, biological, and geophysical operations are each consistent with the vast body of information and evidence that has been accumulated over a period of more than 5 years. This result has been reached with the painstaking efforts of numerous citizens, researchers, and activists across the country and around the globe. Many of the operations under consideration would appear to regard the welfare of human beings, the life of this planet, and our environment as a low priority. Many people, having become convinced of the reality of these operations, will naturally ask the question, what can I do to help? It is also known from experience in history that many of these same individuals feel helpless and powerless after they confront the immensity and complexity of the operations. They also often become disillusioned after encountering the predictable and disingenuous responses of our public servants. It is also known that the traditional methods of dissent and activism are no longer working, and the political process is failing in a constitutional sense. Petitions have been signed and disregarded. Appeals for investigation are dismissed. Calls for media involvement lead to crafted articles of ridicule. Even the legitimacy of the voting process itself is in question. There is no comfortable, reassuring, and simple answer that can be given to you. This is the reality that we must face. It is expected that any success will eventually result from an enormous groundswell of grassroots activism and open public protest. At the current rate of progress, a timeline of decades can be projected before we reach the level of influence that is needed. The sober counter-reality is that the health of this planet is not likely to give us such a generous allowance of time. Our atmosphere is our lifeblood, and like the proverbial frog in the warming pot of water, we are acting obliviously to our own demise. You will have to use your talents and resources, your gift of life, to help this planet. The role of this researcher has been to give you the best information of what is believed to be the true nature of the aerosol operations. You will have to determine your role and exercise that role while you still have the opportunity to do so. If you are a professional, you must inquire into the ethics of your profession and answer the questions of public service that accompany it. If you are a citizen, you must participate. If you remain silent in the hope of preserving your freedom and security, you are almost certain to lose both. The doctor, the journalist, the scientist, the lawyer, the politician, the environmentalist, the activist, the author, the filmmaker, the fundraiser, the organizer. You must all assume your roles openly, publicly, and quickly to offer any real hope for our survival. I make this appeal to you. This documentary is a not-for-profit venture. It has been made with an appeal to you personally in mind. It may be freely copied in its entirety and distributed. No individual is permitted to distribute this documentary with a profit motive. It has been created for the benefit of the public. Please help us to restore and regain the world that you know can exist.
stratíte reč a prestanete vnímať všetko okolo seba. S predplatenou O2 kartou máte SMS-ky do všetkých sietí navždy len za 1 korunu. Tak to si píšte. O2.
Nick and I discussed many things. One of the things we discussed, or he brought up in conversation, was reducing world population, and felt that there were too many people in the world. But they felt that they wanted to reduce world population, and he felt that it should be reduced by half.
I heard a leader